What if the most powerful man on earth had no idea what he'd walked into? And worse, what if the people around him were too afraid to tell him? That's not a hypothetical. That's where we are right now. A war that nobody fully planned for, a strait that controls a massive chunk of the world's energy supply, and a president who, when asked who would control it, answered, and I'm not paraphrasing, maybe me. Maybe me and whoever the next Ayatollah turns out to be. That's a direct quote. Let that sit for a second. Because here's the thing, this isn't just embarrassing. This is the kind of miscalculation that reshapes economies, topples governments, and sends shockwaves through every stock market on the planet, which it already has. Asian markets didn't just dip, they collapsed. Energy prices didn't just rise, they soared. And the world watched, waiting to see if Washington had any adults left in the room. Spoiler, the jury's still out. If you want to understand how we got here and where this is actually heading, stay with me, because this story is moving fast and most people are only seeing fragments of it. And if analysis like this matters to you, the kind that cuts through the noise and tells you what's really happening, make sure you're subscribed. We do this every time something this significant breaks. Now, back to the war nobody was supposed to fight. Before any missiles flew, there was an armada. A full military armada moved into position in the Middle East, and the expectation, apparently the sincere expectation from the top, was that Iran would see it, panic, and surrender without a single shot fired. That was the plan, not a contingency. The plan. And when Iran didn't flinch, when they didn't throw up their hands, there was genuine surprise at the highest level of the American government. That surprise should terrify you. Because what it tells you is that the decision to escalate was not based on a serious reading of Iranian resolve, Iranian capability, or Iranian history. It was based on a feeling, a gut sense that the regime was weak, that it was one good shove away from collapsing, and that a short, sharp show of force would do what decades of sanctions hadn't managed to do. And where did that confidence come from? Partly from Venezuela, a completely different country, a completely different geopolitical situation where a quick operation produced a quick result. And apparently that was enough to convince the decision makers that the same playbook would work against one of the most strategically experienced regimes in the Middle East. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, go home by the weekend. Except Iran hit back, not just at Israel, at American assets in the Gulf, at the Gulf states themselves. Things that had been explicitly warned about, horizontal escalation they called it, were dismissed before the war and then arrived exactly as predicted. The strait became a crisis point. Oil infrastructure started taking damage, and suddenly the short war that was supposed to be over before it became a headline was very much not over. And here's where it gets even more complicated. You cannot just walk away from this. The idea that America could de-escalate, pull back, and let Israel and Iran sort it out, that's not a clean exit. Iran has cards, real cards. They can sustain pressure. They can inflict damage. They have allies and proxies and leverage that doesn't disappear because Washington decides it's tired of the situation. And if America walks away without a resolution, it doesn't look like restraint. It looks like retreat. It looks like the most expensive military in human history blinked, which means there's no clean move left on the board. Escalate and the consequences deepen. De-escalate and the credibility damage is severe. Stay the course and the war keeps burning through resources, alliances, and whatever political goodwill still existed before any of this started. And speaking of political goodwill, the midterms are coming, and this war is not winning votes. The House was already looking shaky. Now the Senate is in play. And if both chambers flip, the presidency becomes largely symbolic. Executive orders flying around, but no legislative muscle to back anything up. That's the political math, and it's getting harder to ignore. Meanwhile, and this is the part that rarely gets enough attention, Russia is quietly winning. Sanctions that were supposed to be choking Moscow's economy have been loosened as a side effect of this conflict. Energy prices going up means Russian oil revenue going up. And the longer the disruption continues, the more that calculus works in Moscow's favor. So the question has to be asked plainly. How does a war against Iran end up benefiting Russia, driving up Chinese investment opportunities, and degrading Western unity, and still get called a win for America? The math simply doesn't work. Now let's talk about what's been said publicly. There were statements suggesting negotiations were underway, that progress was being made, that there were talks happening at a high level. Iran denied it completely, officially, with specificity. They didn't just shake their heads, they laid out their actual terms on the table: full withdrawal of American military presence from the Gulf region, an end to the military campaign, and reparations. Those aren't negotiating positions you float when you're secretly close to a deal. Those are terms you announce when you want the world to know there is no deal. So when the American side suggests there are good people, reasonable people, solid people being spoken to, without naming anyone, without producing any evidence, without any corroboration from the other side, it raises a question that is uncomfortable but unavoidable. Is this deliberate misdirection, or is it something else? Is it possible that the statements being made are not calculated deceptions but something more genuinely disconnected from reality? And that is a question that should be ringing alarm bells in every corridor of power that still has functioning bells. The deeper issue, the one that doesn't get talked about enough, is not just what was decided, but how. This was not a war that went through the usual machinery. No systematic review of intelligence assessments, no rigorous deliberation of options and consequences, no meaningful congressional process. It was a small group of people making an enormous decision and then watching it unfold in ways they clearly hadn't modeled. Contrast that with how major decisions get made elsewhere in the world right now: detailed multi-year processes, academic input, systematic debate, and the gap is not just noticeable, it's alarming. Because when you skip the process, you skip the part where someone raises their hand and says, wait, what if they don't back down? What if they close the strait? What if they hit our assets? What if this isn't Venezuela? Nobody raised the hand loudly enough. Or if they did, it wasn't heard. And the result is a war that has no clean ending, a strait that nobody credibly controls, an oil and gas infrastructure that has taken real physical damage, and that matters because refineries and pipelines are not rebuilt in weeks. They take years. The supply shock doesn't end when the shooting stops. It lingers, and it costs every ordinary person in every country that depends on that energy. This is the moment, not for panic, but for honest reckoning. The world is watching to see whether the institutions that are supposed to function actually function, whether the people who swore oaths to uphold something larger than one man's instincts actually show up and do that. Congress has the constitutional authority over declarations of war. That is not a technicality. That is the architecture of the republic. And right now, that architecture needs people willing to use it. Because the alternative, letting this continue to drift on instinct and improvisation, is not a strategy. It's a gamble. And the stakes are not abstract. They're oil prices, stock markets, allied trust, human lives, and the basic question of whether decisions of this magnitude will ever again be made by anything resembling a rational process. That question does not have a certain answer yet, but it is the most important question in the world right now.